as marketers, we bring a very special skill set to the table. The key is, how do we weaponize it for that specific industry, for that specific situation?
Entercom breaks all records.
Today I am speaking with Paul Suchman, CMO of Audacy, the company formerly known as Entercom Communications, the second largest owner of radio stations in the United States. Through its media footprint, Audacy reaches 200 million listeners across the US and is one of those interesting brands navigating the crossroads, some would say the divide, between old and new media. Paul's an especially interesting CMO for a media company because he previously served as global CMO of real estate giant CBRE and all 71,000 of its employees. Originally a top global leader at marketing agencies like BBDO and Ogilvy, Paul has seen it all and now with Audacy, heard it all. So how do you transform a perceived legacy business into a brand pushing the envelope in the new world order? Let's find out from Paul Suchman. I'd love to start out by talking about this notion of reinventing a company and reinventing a brand. 2021, it's the spring. Audacy is the new brand name, which was traditionally a company, which was, I think, historically the second largest radio station network in the United States, Entercom. And you're in a new day and age, and you're reinventing yourself as an audio platform instead of a company that is a network of radio stations. So talk about the challenge as a CMO in becoming something you were and something that you want to be, and doing that all at the same time.
Absolutely. So Audacy has been on this transformational journey that really began in 2016, 2017. And the company went through a period of exponential growth. And that growth was driven both by acquisition and by organic growth. But on the acquisition side, where we had some of the best radio stations in the top markets, we grew that by buying the audio assets of CBS Audio. And that put us into virtually every top 50 market with some of the best known, respected, loved, iconic radio brands. As part of that acquisition, we also got this streaming business called radio.com. We made acquisitions in the podcasting space. We acquired Cadence 13. We acquired Pineapple Street Studios. We acquired a podcast network for creators called Podcorn. So we had this really robust podcast offering. We had a live events business, and we were going to market under these live events. We Can Survive in LA at the Hollywood Bowl. That's just one of 6 tentpole events we had at the time. So we had these 4 businesses, over 250 market-facing brands. And what we found was that this name, Entercom, which was really a holding company for all these market-facing brands, it no longer fit who we had become, nor our vision for the future. So we undertook a robust rebranding project, not just to rename the company, but to really represent who we had become, where we were going, and to give us the broad shoulders to continue investing, to continue growing. We also made huge investments in technology as well. So our technology had become a very sophisticated ad tech platform as well. And that's what drove all of it. And we went through a process. We went through a rebranding process that actually began almost exactly when the pandemic began in 2020. And we launched actually during the pandemic in March of 2021.
And so take me through when you think about rebranding. One, to give cohesion, you made all of these acquisitions, so you have to have a cohesive brand. But 2, also to influence perception. Are you a radio station company or are you an audio platform? How do you think about that? And the one little context I'll maybe throw out there, and then you can comment if you agree with this or not, is we have a ton of we're a global marketing agency on our side. We have a lot of companies that come through us because they want to be perceived as company type A. not as company type B because it affects their valuation tremendously. Meaning, is Uber a transportation company that has some pretty cool technology, or is it a technology company that's disrupting transportation? The answer to that question influences their valuation by tens of billions of dollars. So how do you go into it and look at and think about redefining who you are in the minds of your audience for a new age or a modern age?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So radio, capital R radio, is a legacy media, but it's a very, very powerful, relevant media. It's still the number one reach medium. It's still the most trusted medium out there. Virtually 96% penetration across the United States. One of the challenges that the industry was having was, as the way people consumed media was changing, going from traditional radios, lowercase r radios, to consuming it on their phone, consuming it through smart speakers, consuming it in their cars in very different ways, consuming it virtually, it's ubiquitous. It travels with you wherever you go. So there was a perception that the medium was not evolving as technology was evolving. And because Entercom as a brand really was in the radio business, it wasn't in the podcasting business, it wasn't in the streaming business, it was in the live events business, but that brand was not a market-facing brand. There was a need there. That was one of the catalysts to push ourselves forward and to be in the consideration set with modern audio, media, and entertainment companies, Sirius, Spotify, iHeart. There was a need for us to be in that conversation with a brand that was a modern-facing, consumer-facing, business-facing brand that could carry forward all of the equities of that multi-platform offering, but also appeal to our legacy listeners, our legacy over-the-air listeners, and then to a broad swath of new listeners who were rediscovering radio and rediscovering live content and discovering podcasts, but just consuming it in very different ways.
And so as you went through this, where did, first of all, the name come from? And how did you think about sort of telegraphing what is essentially not only a shift in where your focus is from sort of terrestrial radio to other forms of audio, but also maybe even a shift in business model that you could be, are you advertising based? I mean, you sell a lot of ads, but is there a subscription based side of the model? Is there something else? How did you think about the name and those kind of sort of fundamental shifts and how you would communicate that?
Yeah. So the name we went through, you're an agency person. So we went through a very fast and careful strategic and creative process to come up with that new name. We thought about our positioning. We thought about how the company differentiates itself, where the white space was. And really where the white space was in our DNA. Local radio at its core. Not a one-size-fits-all brand, right? We are so deeply ingrained in the communities. We are so deeply we're deeply connected to these marketplaces and to millions of consumers every day, and we wanted to keep that legacy equity, but we wanted to bring it forward. So we went through this big creative process, and we landed on the name Audacy. It actually was a name that we heard in the creative process very early on. But, it's like when you go looking for a new home and you see a house you love, the first house, you can't buy it.
You want to see all the other stuff to get back and say, oh, that was a pretty good one. Okay, sure.
Right. But, what was interesting was that name was always the litmus test. And the name itself, Audacy, Audacy, really it comes down to part audio, part audacious, and part Odyssey to represent that journey we were on. And the name just fit. It landed really well. And when we looked at it as a going from a house of brands to a branded house, having that sit on top felt really right. And it also, everything else lined up too, because you can't just change your name. You have to, if you're going to go through this name change as a public facing company, you have to change all your URLs. They have to be available. You have to change all your socials. They have to be available. We were fortunate that, we were able to get all of those in relatively easy fashion. Sometimes, names fall out because of, if you clear all the legal hurdles and all the trademark hurdles, there's still URLs are not available. There's still social handles are not available. But we got everything lined up. We tested it. This was a name. We serve a lot of different audiences. We serve our clients. We're an advertising supported model. So we serve brands and we serve agencies. We serve our employees. We tested it with our employees. We serve the marketplace, the general marketplace. So we wanted to make sure that the name was landing with all of these audiences. And we went through some testing, and then we launched. And it was it wasn't just a name change. It was every single solitary asset in the company changed. Now, we still have radio stations with their brands, with their call letters. We still have events in the market. We have our podcast studios. So there is an architecture that lives there about when you use which brand, but it really was the Audacy brand. And the first test was going out into the marketplace to our buying audience, agencies, brands directly. And what we found was that the story that we were able to tell coming from Audacy versus coming from Entercom was more cohesive, was more strategic. It was a bigger, broader story. And it really gave us a competitive advantage vis-a-vis our competitive set.
So branding a company is one thing when you have a startup with a clean slate and practically zero brand equity. But it's an entirely different thing when you have a legacy that you don't want to throw away, even when that past legacy can hold you back from becoming the podcasting and digital audio brand you have the potential to be. Paul faced one more level of difficulty. As a public company, you can't afford to get signals crossed with the investment community, especially if you're trying to position yourself in a new way or supercharge a languishing stock price. How is it doing this as a publicly traded company? You're a publicly traded company that, you're on the New York Stock Exchange. You have your, kind of perceived in a legacy business where those are going to, you have like kind of, startup digital native darlings with huge valuations relative to your assets, a smaller valuation. You want to change, you want to pivot that. How do you think about that? Is there anything different being a publicly traded company trying to do this, where, suddenly you're used to everyone knowing who you are, and then you're like, Audacy, and like, oh, you were Entercom. How does that kind of factor into your thinking as maybe an added level of difficulty being publicly traded?
Well, you treat the investment community as another audience, as important as your buying audience, as important as your employees, as important as consumers. And you message that out to them in a very similar way, obviously going through those channels that are appropriate for financial institutions. We were really fortunate that AUD as a ticker symbol was available. So we own audio on the New York Stock Exchange. But at the end of the day, the story they want to hear is one of performance and one of growth and one of continued growth. So the name change was well received, but still those fundamentals and that quarter over quarter performance is what they're looking for. It's a story that is resonating, and it's a story that we're going to have to continue to live up to our markets. And how did doing this then during the pandemic affect any approach in this? Did you think at all about delaying, or did you say, hey, let's accelerate because it kind of a lot of companies are like investing in things they weren't doing otherwise, and this is the time to do it? How did the pandemic play into the thought process in all of this and the role of audio as a marketing channel and you becoming recognized as an audio platform that went beyond radio? It's a great question. So from a market perspective, audio, there was an advertisers, as you know, Ben, advertisers started to pull back during the pandemic because people were just not out buying products, services, goods. So there was a general pullback as we were all collectively as a world going into this unknown time period. But one of the things that happened to the audio industry was it accelerated growth. Consumption of audio accelerated. There was a perception that maybe traditional radio would go into decline because people weren't in their cars and they were staying at home. There may have been a little bit of a blip, but people still consumed it. They just consumed it on smart speakers. They consumed it on their phone. They consumed it directly on their laptops and desktops. So audio consumption actually grew during the pandemic. There was explosive podcasting growth. There was great trajectory for radio. Streaming audio continued its upward trajectory. So that was all good. Those were tailwinds that maybe some other media companies were not enjoying. To me, the most interesting thing, putting on my creative hat now as a marketing person, we kicked off this project and we launched it at every single touch point to every single audience during this pandemic. And the implication of that was every person was working remote on my team, our agency partner teams. So there is a school of thought that says productivity, collaboration, creativity suffered during the pandemic when people became isolated and work from home became the norm. And that may be true, but I think it did not happen for us. If anything, we more creatively excelled. I think there was this feeling that we're all in it together. It became a very intimate project, right? Because you were all in each other's homes and you were working. When you're working towards a launch date that's not changing, you're working funny hours. You're on the phone at 6 a.m., you're on the phone at 6 p.m., you're on the phone at 11 p.m. You got to know spouses, you got to know kids, you got to know dogs, you got to know, you knew people's dogs, you knew people like, I had my dog right with me like that the whole time. And you felt like you were in the foxhole with these people. And that was our agency partners, that was our creative partners, that was our team. And when you're changing every single touch point, it was literally like working with virtually everyone in the company. For me, it was a transformative experience.
Well, and how do you think about, because the notion of the role of audio, I think we have a lot of startup clients, major presence in Bay Area, Silicon Valley. And for a while, everyone, at least in this sort of first mover tech community, was talking about Clubhouse, right? And I don't know if you're familiar, like an app on your smartphone, these kind of like conversations around topics. And I'm interested to see your perspective of that as someone that's like, hey, we're becoming we're transitioning from radio stations to audio platforms, and these startups come up, and for like a hot minute, it was like everyone was on this thing, and then it kind of went down just as fast. So you're doing your rebrand at the time. What was going through your mind? What were you thinking when suddenly, at least in this sort of tech or creative class, everyone's going on this one platform, and then people kind of stopped using it just as fast?
I think our thought with it was, we've been doing this for 50 years. If you think about talk radio, think about sports radio, think about news radio, think about any of the voice-led communications that have been happening for the last 50 years. It's the same basic format. Somebody is leading a conversation, people are calling in. Now, you can have chat and all that, but by the way, our radio stations, our app, have websites where people are reaching us with those kind of communications. So for us, it was it was nothing new. Twitter Spaces was another one that was out there, but we had been doing that. It's the same basic format as podcasting, although you're not having guests call in, but you're still having bigger conversations with more than one person. 2-3-way conversations, and you're allowing outside voices in. So for us, We did not see that as a threat. We saw it as validation for everything that we were doing. And if anything, it accelerated our move towards digital.
And what is the role and the importance of podcasts now, in your opinion, as a marketing channel? We've seen this rise of, the Joe Rogans of the world, reportedly $200 million deal from Spotify. I think it was reported first at $100 million, then it went up to $200 million. Who knows? You have podcasts that come from nowhere. Call Me Daddy podcast sold for $60 million. Another one brought up by Barstool Sports. What is the role of podcasts? Is it just an evolution of radio programs and there was star performers before, or is it something different? And what do you think the future is as a marketing channel for advertisers, brands, agencies?
Well, I think that the podcasts that really land, like take Glennon Doyle's podcast, right? That is a sensational podcast. And Glennon has this relationship with her millions of listeners who they build their day around that podcast. My wife is a big Glennon person, and she will take time when a new episode drops to connect with and listen to and hear Glennon. And that's it. Like, that is the moment. Like, Glennon is the ritual. And what podcasting is doing with consumers is building these just deeply bonded relationships, stronger than these personalities have in other mediums.
So what's so special about a podcast? And why have they taken over from vanilla radio? Consider that radio's peak listener periods are during the so-called morning drive or afternoon drive time, the times when people are in their cars and presumably commuting to and from work. Regular radio, therefore, was in part a way to pass the time doing something more enjoyable than just sitting in a car in heavy traffic. But podcasting gave audio a new sense of freedom, turning it into something that could be engaged with beyond the confines of your car, say on your own schedule while going for a jog or working out at the gym. Better yet, for the very best podcasts, you might even decide to jog or go for a gym workout just to have the opportunity to listen to the show. To Paul, all of this means that a podcast gives you a real opportunity to make a deeper connection with your audience.
Well, I think it's not, it tends to not be scripted content. It tends to be real. It tends to be more emotional. It's longer form, so the connection is deeper. If you ask a podcaster who's also in other mediums, they will tell you that the relationship they have with their podcast listeners is just different because they're just talking about more. They're revealing more of themselves. They're opening up more. And all of this. So the reason I was even saying this was because for advertisers, right? That's a real opportunity for advertisers, if they do it right, to insert themselves into these environments that are deeply engaged, deeply immersed, where trust is there, where love is there. And if a brand is in there, a product is in there that is being endorsed either overtly with a live read or even through a stop set of advertising, that ad, that brand, that product has a much bigger chance of landing with that audience because it is coming almost verified, right? A podcaster is not going to have advertising on their program that they don't support, they don't endorse. They're certainly not going to do those live reads. And they have a voice in the stop set advertising as well, lots of times. So there is that trust, that immersion, that engagement, that equity transfers from host to advertiser. So I think that's what the opportunity is for these advertisers to find the right hosts, the right formats, the right ways to disrupt, but disrupt in a additive way to what's happening in that podcast. So that's what I see as the opportunity.
Where do you think, all of this is going in five years from now? what do you think we'll be doing as marketers, either if there's, many other CMOs listening, if there's other heads of agencies listening, where is this all going into maybe how we look at the media buying mix 5 years from now, different than what we're doing now or what we were doing 5 years before?
I think for audio specifically, the role of audio continues to grow. I think audio keeps taking share from other medium. And I think that for a couple of reasons. One, because the content, there's just great content being produced. You're seeing brands run towards audio. It's still underinvested relative to other medium, but as brands are rethinking their 360 plans, they are shifting dollars to audio. Coupled with that, if you look at the next phase of computing, it's screenless computing, it's voice-driven computing. And all of that together means brands need to really think about how they sound. Brands spend a lot of time on their visual and verbal identities, and it's critically important. But their audio identity, whether that's their sonic identity or experientially how that brand
So
sounds.
sonic identity, you mean like if it's Intel inside and there's a little chime that goes with it, or people probably, back in the day in their new old AOL mail account, you've got mail or something else.
Yeah.
You mean as an audio mark that's an identifiable sound is what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And as people transact with that brand, MasterCard has become the new, when we talk about that, it used to be Intel, the four chime, but MasterCard has done a very, very sophisticated job of thinking through their audio identity, of their sound identity, their sonic brand, not only from how it shows up when the mark shows up in places, but if you actually transact, you get certain sounds with the brand. And it's really important. Car companies are thinking about that too, not just the way their logo resolves with a sonic identity, but the in-car experience, how that sounds when you turn on the radio, when you turn on the ignition, when you click buttons, when you close a door. The sonic identity, that sonic footprint of a brand is becoming a lot more important. And again, we're going to screenless computing, right? You're going to talk to your computers. You talk to your car now, right? You talk to your car. And so the way that car speaks back to you and the sounds that car makes, that's the sonic identity. It's gone way beyond logos.
And what is, talk about how, you spend a lot of your time talking about how other brands can market using Audacy, but how do you market to reach sort of the kind of the tripod you referenced earlier, the triangle, right? You work with brands who are big advertising buyers. You work with agencies who facilitate those advertising buys. What do you spend your marketing, your day on, and how do you reach those key stakeholders?
So on the business side, on the B2B side of the house, the agencies and the brands themselves, we have a number of different strategies that we execute. We do thought leadership. We build a lot of thought leadership content in the form of research and insights that we publish as big pieces, as small pieces, as audio pieces. And we're spending a lot of time putting that in front of the market, meeting them in the
what type are these, like data insights related to I don't know, consumption patterns or changes? Or is there a kind of a focal point or a pillar for the types of sort of thought leadership content you're doing?
We follow the trends. We follow the trends. So we talk about, we do it through the lens of audio, and we do it through the, as the CMO, I have to be a champion of the audio industry and the Audacy brand. So as an example, twice a year, we publish a really robust piece that we call State of Audio. And it's really what's happening in the state of audio. And each time it's a different theme. So we just published one last month, and it was on the disruptors. And it talked about how audio is being disrupted by the creator community, what that means for the advertiser community, and the disruption that's happening from the consumers, because that's the triumvirate of, you have creators, You have advertisers and you have consumers. So we do that twice a year. We're working on one that's going to come out in the fall, and we just did some research on rituals. The ritual, people live very ritualistic lives. They get up in the morning, they have their coffee, and we did some research to understand the role that audio plays in people's lives and rituals, and the findings were stunning. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on that, and we found that the role of audio is unbelievable in these rituals, and in some cases, audio is the ritual itself. I'm not going to go for a run and listen to this podcast. I'm going to go for a run so I can listen to this podcast. I'm going to take the long way home so I can finish this program. I'm going to sit in the driveway and finish this radio segment. It's just amazing stuff. So we do that, and we also publish some hard insights and articles, a drumbeat. We're spending a lot of time at the conferences where advertisers are, whether it's ANA or Advertising Week. So we're showing up there next to our competitive set, next to other media companies. And that's an air game that we're providing. And then I spend a lot of time, as you and I talked about, before we went live, I spend a lot of time with our CRO working on our ground game, giving our salespeople the tools that they need to sell better, to sell deeper into organizations, to win more business more frequently. So that's what we're doing on that side of the house. And on the other side, go ahead.
So yeah, so that's the business B2B side, but you also care about just reaching audiences, consumers as well, because ultimately you put brands and consumers together. So how much of your day is spent thinking about just reaching consumers and them understanding, what either your master brand is or the individual sub brands that they might experience in their local market?
The answer is a lot. We spend a lot of time thinking about that. We have 200 million listeners on the platform, over the air, on the stream, listening to our podcasts. And we reach them, on our own platform. We reach them on third-party platforms, and we're trying to do two things with them. We're trying to grow our audience. We want to grow that audience from 200 to 300 to 400 million listeners. We want them to come onto our app. We want them to spend time on our app, and we want to get more listening time with them. They have lots of other choices out there for audio, and they have lots of other choices out there for other medium that could take the place of audio. And we want them to spend time with us. So we are in acquisition mode to grow that total audience base. And we're also in growth mode with our existing audience base, getting them onto our app, getting them more listening occasions. So if we see, Ben, you're on our app and you're listening to some of our sports stations, we're going to serve you sports streams. We're going to serve you sports related podcasts. We're going to see what else you listen to. And if you're listening to alt music, we're going to serve you different alt stations that may not be in your metro area. We're going to serve you really interesting podcasts by musicians. So the idea is not just to grow the audience, but to give that audience more listening occasions. And that's really what the advertisers. Go ahead.
Well, and how much of that, like a competitor like Spotify, makes a lot of sort of splash for putting a lot of effort in marketing behind stars, right? Stars of these podcasts, they command large audiences, bringing them in, putting large sums for that. What do you think of that as a strategy? And do you try to mimic that, or do you try to go a totally different way? Or is growth a star-driven medium?
Spotify, as you talked about earlier, is one of those darlings on the street. And one of the things that we have embraced as an organization, and I have embraced as a marketer, is being a challenger brand, right? So Spotify, we are not going to outspend Spotify. We're not going to put Joe Rogan on the flagship, because that would eat an entire marketing budget. And Spotify can do that over and over and over again. But what we have through our roots in radio is we have Joe Rogans in virtually every single market across every single genre. And we have them on 24 hours a day. And they are so deeply connected to these audiences and these communities. So while Spotify is doing a top-down approach, we have that star power too. We have that star power in our podcast. We have national radio personalities, but we have so much power in the market. So going bottom up and growing it that way in the community has been a differentiator for us. And brands love that too. Brands appreciate that connection. Brands appreciate that authenticity, that, it's not a one size fits all. So we see that actually as a competitive differentiator. It makes for some really interesting, scrappy marketing to consumers.
Well, and you're focused on audio, but then you're part of a larger just content ecosystem where there's been a lot of changes, like the proliferation of all the, I call them the pluses, right? All the subscription,
Absolutely.
The Disney Plus, the Paramount Plus, everyone's got their plus. Some people, CNN had one for a hot minute and then turned it off, I think 3 weeks after. So it's sort of this, what is your feeling of marketing and also providing obviously audiences for marketers in this broader context beyond audio of a lot of direct distribution in subscription mechanisms and other mechanisms to reach consumers as you're part of this broader ecosystem too?
It's exactly right. I think we have our competitive set as a challenger brand, but at the end of the day, we are competing against all other media companies for that personal prime time, that time when a human being has to devote to consuming media. And that person can say, I'm going to consume video. I'm going to scroll on social. I'm going to go on Facebook. I'm going to consume audio. So we are really competing for that personal prime time. And one of the things that happened during the pandemic, and we're still seeing it now, although I'm in New York and I commuted into New York City today, and it is business as usual. Train was packed, subway's packed, streets are packed. Like, it's palpable that you can feel people coming back into the workplace, and it's awesome. But we have become now this world where those norms stopped existing for a while, and they're probably never going to go back to the way it was. Although, who knows? So the advantage that audio has is audio, of all the other medium out there, audio is the most ubiquitous. Audio is the ultimate companion media. It can be with you when you're driving. It can be with you when you're on the train, when you're on the subway. It can be with you when you're exercising. It can be with you when you're cooking. It can be with you when you're lying with your eyes closed, just finding your breath and finding center. There's no other medium that does that. And we think that through this proliferation of content, that is one of the shining star powers of audio. We're also seeing on the subscription business side, one of the things that we have seen is that there is so many pluses out there that you say, like that you were just talking about. We're almost seeing promiscuity from people, that I'll go into Paramount Plus because I want to get Yellowstone, but as soon as that's done, I'm not going to pay $4.95 anymore. And particularly now, as people are looking at costs and looking at belt tightening, people are looking at those subscription models really carefully. I mean, I do that in my own home with my kids and my wife, and I look at what we pay for media every month, and it's staggering. And you start to make some decisions. So, we feel really good about competing in that overall ecosystem because of the power, the reach, the ubiquity of audio. And because we're an ad-supported model versus a subscription-driven model, that we're not an either or, we're an and.
Here's one of my favorite aspects of a podcast. It's a real opportunity to develop a deeper relationship with your audience. Podcasts were great for that because relationships form from repeat interactions over an extended period of time. And a podcast facilitates that because of its free-form format and the ability to listen to it while you're doing other things, thereby increasing your overall time commitment to it. But what is Paul's advice for CMOs who are thinking about setting up their own podcast? Is audio a potentially powerful marketing channel?
I think, you need to think about the audience and what you are trying to do. So as a B2B marketer, you're not trying to reach 200 million listeners. You are trying to reach a more finite, clearly defined audience. There may be different cohorts in there, but B2B, B2C, there's this almost artificial demarcation. The one thing I think everybody has in common, whether they're wearing their professional hat or their consumer hat, is there is a lot of content out there, and people are inundated with information and messaging all day long. So I think the first thing a CMO needs to think about if they're building a podcast or audio content for their own brand is, am I going to be putting something out there on behalf of our brand that my audience wants to consume and will make time to consume and will move other things off of their desktop to consume that? And it's tough. And by the way,
if you can make something valuable, that make it valuable. Yeah. But if you're doing something to go through the motions, and if you're being honest with yourself, you wouldn't even listen yourself, then maybe not.
But think about what you're doing here with me, Ben. Like, this is, you got to get up tomorrow and do it again. And then the next day you're going to get up and do it again and again. And it's a lot of work. I mean, you're really good at your craft, and you got an awesome voice, by the way. And I'll tell you, I think that it's not easy. You have to, this is not just a one and done. If you do it, you're going to have to keep doing it. Otherwise, it's not going to be worth the resources, the time, the energy you've put behind it. And even worse, it could have a negative trajectory on your own brand. So we work with a lot of brands on branded podcasts, and we have teams of people who this is what they think about day in and day out. And they spend a lot of time building these branded podcasts, thinking about subject matter, thinking about audience, thinking about that content that they are going to produce. And it is a significant part of the brands who we work with, their budget and their time. And they don't wait in. They don't wait in. They go, if they go in, they go in, and they commit.
And how does, to wrap up, how does all of this, I don't know if we would have chatted 10 years ago, if you would thought this would be the field you're in now and the industry you're in now. You've been a long time CMO in multiple industries. You spent 5 plus years as CMO at CBRE, massive real estate company. You come from the agency world. You were CMO at BBDO. I think also CMO. I think it's how CMO in residence at WPP, another massive agency holding company. So how does all of that, inform what you do now? Does real estate industry marketing impact how you do your job now? And for people that might be jumping sectors or verticals like you have?
The jump from real estate to audio, it was like, that was a big jump, right? You could argue one was the marketing role was butts in seats in real estate, and now it's ears on content in
sure.
in audio. I think at the end of the day, the thing that I love about marketing is you get to use creativity, you get to use words, you get to use design, you get to use sound, you get to use motion graphics to help communicate really typically complex concepts, complex business lines in really compelling ways, and try to differentiate. And I think that's the throughput through all of this, is great marketing and great creativity can jump from industry to industry to industry. The tenets are the same. So for me, going from just the real estate to audio jump, it wasn't a big leap in terms of the great unknown, because the tenets remained the same. The playing field was a little bit different, understanding the subject matter, becoming expert at audio and really learning that. And I'm still learning it 3 years later. That was the learning curve, but bringing that experience of marketing made that jump a lot easier. And I'll tell you, it's been incredibly energizing. One, because this is just such an amazing time for the audio industry. But what this company has allowed me to lead on behalf of the 4,000 people here, this brand transformation, this hyper growth, this really becoming a challenger brand and taking on the giants like Spotify. It's fun getting up every morning and doing that. And so I guess if you're asking the advice I'd give and the learning that I've taken away is, as marketers, we bring a very special skill set to the table. The key is, how do we weaponize it for that specific industry, for that specific situation, and be able to be relevant and be able to be an impact player. The one thing that I have seen where CMOs struggle is where their organization or they themselves become perceived as a marketing as a cost center versus marketing as a business driver, a business enabler. And when you do that, when you can use creativity to do that, everybody wins.
And isn't that, in some ways, the distinction between a CMO and like just a marketing head, right? A very senior marketing person that runs marketing. I don't know how you describe it, but I often think of it as, once you put that C in front of the title, then part of your responsibility is the overall direction of the business. You're responsible for, yes, all the marketing functions, but you're also responsible for being an input into how decisions are made for the benefits of the business and how marketing has its seat at the table, but also influences and interacts with all the other functions that go in. I don't know how you define what makes a CMO or a great CMO. What are the qualities that make it different than just running marketing?
I think using creativity as a business driver is the key. And it's exactly what you said. It's what is the role of marketing to contribute to the company's business goals. And once you start delivering there and you're involved in those conversations, then the conversations evolved and include you in the strategic forward direction of the organization. And it's an incredibly exciting place to be. It's about earning that trust and support of the C-suite. And I'll tell you, the one thing that I have seen, no matter where I am, is marketing is something that everybody has an opinion about, right? People love marketing. People love to talk about marketing. We have an amazing CFO, but I'm not going to go have a P&L discussion with him, and we're not going to argue about the way spreadsheets are set up or the way we're reporting. That is his craft, and that is what he does. Same with our CTO. She is an unbelievable technologist, and I am not going to argue with her about our MarTech stack. But marketing is this thing that touches everybody, right? Everybody. And so there's a lot of opinions there. So bringing that together and being a great collaborator and harnessing that energy of the C-suite is a really important piece of that too, I'd say.
For Paul Suchman, CMO of Audacy, the past, present, and future is all about audio. But while the media that delivers the audio may differ, the underlying principles stay the same. Tell a story, be authentic, engage with your community, and have a clear value or purpose. If you're a challenger brand, then don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. Be real, be more emotional in your marketing, and make a point to develop a relationship with your audience with regular, meaningful interactions. So here's the $1 million question. Knowing what you know now, should you or your company start your own podcast? And the answer? Well, I might be a little biased on that one. For Top CMO, I'm Ben Kaplan.